Dámy a pánové, vítejte. My máme to potěšení přivítat dneska Jana Koláře, který je český archeolog, působící v současnosti na Institute of Archaeology University College London a který se dlouhodobě zabývá otázkami vztahu pravěkého osídlení a přírodního prostředí a interakce mezi člověkem a přírodou, aktivními zdroji, krajinou. Tak dnes ho poprosím, aby nás seznámil s tématem svého výzkumu.
Děkuji za pozvání. Ještě bych se chtěl ujistit, mám tu přednášku dělat v angličtině nebo v češtině? Jsou tady nějací mezinárodní kolegové nebo online mýváci mezinárodní?
Aktuálně nejsou a online podělí se online. Jako nám je to vlastně úplně jedno. A jak spíš tobě to vyhovuje víc?
A další.
Jako může to být v češtině, no, právě, no.
Jo?
Možná spíš si to necháme na tobě.
No, nejsou jako
jedno, já to dám pro vás. No, nebo pro
no, teď tady vlastně není nikdo, ne?
Tady není nikdo.
tak klidně v češtině.
Aha.
Okay, so we will do it anyways. So we will be all comfortable with English, so we'll continue in that. So first of all, thank you very much for having me here. And today I have chosen the topic of plants and humans of the past, because in the past I've dealt with that topic within the project, within my previous projects, when I was still based at the Institute of Botany of the Czech Academy of Sciences. However, we will look. However, we will look at this relationship from a perspective of modeling approaches. The usual, or most people would think that the relationship between plants and humans in the past, in prehistory, can be studied through archaeobotany or palaeoecology. And you can find many of these books, many papers using these approaches. When I was compiling this slide, what struck me at the first sight is that most of these books are actually in green, which is, I don't know why these people don't like other colors, but yeah, that's it. However, we can look at this interaction also from the other perspective, from the perspective of archaeology, because this is my background. I'm an archaeologist. I would say that I have very superficial knowledge of botany or ecology. I cannot determine archaeobotanical macro remains. I cannot determine pollen grains, none of these. I don't have training in that. However, if you look at this example of one of the most well-known archaeological finds with good preservation of organic materials, the well-known Etsy, you can find that only around him, like all the material culture he had with him, was produced from many plant materials, from many trees, which were, of course, growing a little bit lower than he was discovered. But this gives you an idea what was the breadth of utilized species, utilized tree taxa. If we stick for a while to the trees, we know that trees are really important material and really important component of prehistoric landscapes. We can say that forest or woodland in the prehistory or even today is still the most important component of a landscape, at least in temperate Europe. There's nothing more important than forests. And people in temperate Europe, let's say, used trees for many different purposes. They built houses of trees. They used different parts of trees to different artifacts or different products. There are experiments and hypotheses, and also some evidence that that fires at the landscape level were used to manage the whole landscape. So they were used to manure the fields, and also we have to remind ourselves that the prehistoric forests, or also medieval forests, looked actually very different from the forests and woodland we have now in Czech Republic, in Central Europe. From the past, we know about the different regimes of woodland management, and then which resulted in slightly different shapes of trees, as we can see now in Czech landscape. Nowadays, after reintroduction, these ideas, you can finally see again some restored focuses, etc., etc. These woodland management, or these remains of woodland management, they are still very much to see in the UK, for example, because the tradition was not disturbed in the 20th century, but in Czech landscape, this has nearly disappeared. If we step even more to archaeology, to really just leaving the plants behind, we can have a look on axes. And axes are actually the most important artifact how humans interacted with trees, because you needed axe to fell a tree, you need axe to process the tree into specific shape of the log, or different artifacts you can create with this artifacts. And archaeologists they really love to study the axes. Archaeologists are studying experimentally what can be done with an axe. They are studying the interaction networks based on studying the raw materials from which the axes are produced. They are also studying for example, social hierarchies through the axe depositions in graves, because obviously the axes, the stone axes, and then later the metal axes were so important that they had so important a role in the prehistoric societies that they have been deposited also in graves or hoards, and they were transported over hundreds of kilometers in Europe. These artifacts were also crucial to build large architecture, but also large artifacts which were crucial for other social processes like transport. You couldn't build a log boat without an axe. Yeah, as I said, they were also used in maintaining and creating the supra-regional networks, even on the continental level.
What are those pictures?
These pictures,
especially the upper one.
This one.
Yeah.
So this is a 3D scan of one of stones at Stonehenge, and it was, I think, like 4 or 5 years ago. They scanned all the stones in a very detailed way, and they discovered that on the stones there are these petroglyphs of stone axes. This wasn't known previously, so there are not. I think at Stonehenge there are no positions of the artifacts around, but there are these petroglyphs on the stones. And so we know how archaeology can look at plants, or how archaeology can study or studied up to now these interaction between humans and plants. And what about palaeoecology? You are familiar with this discipline and this department. And what is going on now in palaeoecology is that this discipline is somehow moving from the level of studying one site and creating some vegetation reconstruction based on one or closely located sites, up to the level of a continent or even the whole world. So what is paleoecology now striving for is large scale and long-term models of a vegetation. You can see here now one of these examples. So I think the dots are the individual sites from which the pollen profiles come from, and then you have this grid where you can actually have some values of these vegetation models. You can see now that there are already teams doing or creating these vegetation models on the continental scales, and there are different teams working in Australia or Eastern China or Eastern Asia in general, and Africa, etc., etc. And the ultimate goal for this is to create some vegetation models which can be then compared with climate models, and to study what was the interactions between climate changes and vegetation.
And this is like scale from 0 to 100, the three-sum, the green scale.
Yeah.
Percent.
No, this is a percentage.
Percentage, yes,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah, sorry, maybe not very.
And from which time period is this?
I'm not sure, because I took this just for an illustration. So this is probably, it depends. It depends what is the temporal scale. Usually these vegetation models work in 500 years time block, or 200 or 1000. It depends on the data quality and also on the aims of that research. But you can find the details here.
It is supposed to cover the last 11,000 years.
Yeah, this paper is.
Yeah.
That's mostly the limitation of the pollen data, because after 12,000 years, the amount of data you will get is mostly declining heavily. So that's why lots of these papers and global synthesis, etc., are focusing on the, let's say, Holocene period or a little bit earlier, because you can push it to, let's say, 18,000 years sometimes, but the amount of data you will get is very, very low.
Yes. Thanks for that. However, if we compare these perspectives from paleoecology and archaeology, if we just look at the very basic definitions of these disciplines, we can see that they have very much in common. So paleoecology is studying relationships between organisms and their environment, and archaeology is studying and working also on preservation of material remains of past societies and their environment. So you can see that the past societies are actually also organisms in their environment. So this is very common. So that's why I would argue that archaeology and paleoecology should work together much more often. Of course, these disciplines are already collaborating quite often, but I would say it's not enough. And there are several reasons for that. First is that we somehow still are working with this dichotomy between nature and culture. And this is also embedded in the educational structures. So as part, I mean, I have background in archaeology, but the education in ecology, for example, or archaeobotany, or archaeozoology, or zoology, or ecology in general was very poor or nearly non-existent. And I would say that if you study at the Faculty of Science, the other discipline, like ecology or vegetation ecology, you probably didn't have lectures in social theory or human geography or all these topics from humanities or social sciences, which are actually very interesting and very handy. What we often also see that, and this is also from my own personal experience, that we often do not understand each other. So sometimes we need quite a lot of time to understand what are our research questions and what do we want to achieve. What kind of terminology are the others actually using? What does it mean, a disturbance? What is it, social hierarchy? Do we really understand on these very basic levels? And then I would say there are some methodological issues. From the archaeology point of view, archaeology is or was until now, I would say, missing the long-term and large-scale quantifications of archaeological data. Because archaeologists are often very much focusing on one archaeological site, which they are excavating for their life, because the site is very important. It is also very interesting. I'm not saying that it is not important or it is not significant for the whole humanity. However, if you want to create a continental vegetation model, one archaeological site really doesn't matter that much. And that leads to scenarios when you have quantitative models of climate, because they come from different proxies and they are really long-term, so they are covering let's say last 10,000 years. You can also do that with vegetation, but then when it comes to discussing the role of human, then the data on humans are actually missing. So then these research teams are usually just eyeballing and thinking, yeah, maybe this vegetation change was caused by humans, but there is no data covering that space and time at all. From the other side of the barricade, we can also criticize the palaeoecology that humans are usually thought of just as disturbances, similar to beavers or similar to, I don't know, large herds of deer or other things you can think of. Sometimes they are a bit quantified if there are such data sets, but they are not, then at the level of the interpretations, there are really only few insights from the social archaeology. And this is understandable because people, I mean, this dialogue is still not there. It's still not very fruitful to see that in research. However, archaeology has made a huge step forward recently. So there are currently global databases, for example, of C14 dates, which can be used as a proxy for population dynamics. So we can have at least some relative measure of numbers of populations on the global level. Regionally, we can use also databases of archaeological sites, but that is usually very specific for countries. There is really important advancement in computation. This is not just for archaeology, but that is also typical for paleoecology or climate science, etc. Archaeology is also currently very much interested in demographic archaeology. So there are a lot of researchers trying actually to translate all these numbers of archaeological sites into levels of populations, because we have an archaeological site, but we still don't know how many people actually lived there, and this is still ongoing. Archaeology, you can also trace this interest in environmental topics or in vegetation, in this research into vegetation population dynamics. You can trace that, let's say, from the first Congress of the IPCC in the 1988, and you can see that this is this interest of archaeology in these topics, in this boom of papers in major global archaeological journals in the last 30 years. And of course, we can mention also Anthropocene and environmental humanities, and these topics are also coming to archaeology, helping to make better interpretations. So what do we need? We already agreed that paleoecology and archaeology have actually, from the basic definition, very obviously common goals. And if we have a look on this diagram, we can see that paleoecology and archaeology, they have also shared temporal windows. So we are both of these disciplines are actually very much interested in last 10,000 years, basically. So we have the shared temporal and spatial scale. And nowadays, with the recent advancements in archaeology, we have also that on the data level. So we have already data which can be compared with vegetation models, etc. However, we need to work more, I would say, on the common research aims, so that we understand each other from the beginning of the research projects, from the beginning of the preparation of the research project, so that we know right from the beginning what are we going to do. And we need interdisciplinarity, like real interdisciplinarity or even transdisciplinarity, when we understand each other and not just compare different lines of evidence. And I would like to demonstrate that on some of the three main results of the project. I was leading between 2019 and 2021 before I left for the UCL. So we together with these colleagues, we were trying to do some research into land use, in the interactions between land use, human population dynamics, social transformation. So there was a big component of the social transformation, and woodland. And why? Why in Czech Republic? We decided to do that in Czech Republic because I mentioned already at the beginning that both of these disciplines, they need to share the temporal and spatial scale on the data level. Czech Republic is ideal place for that. There in the, here on the map, you can see in the blue circles, these are buffers around pollen profiles. In Czech Republic, I think most of them are in the PALIC database. Those colors, which are sometimes light and sometimes a bit darker, those are identifications of archaeological components from two archaeological databases covering the whole country. These are the archaeological map of Czech Republic and the Longwood archaeological database, which I co-authored before this project. During this project, we also created the database of archaeological C14 date for the whole Czech Republic. You can see the coverage here. This was also published, and it is publicly available. And then we included also the Pladias database, which is the vegetation of the recent, or let's say sub-recent vegetation from the last 100 or 150 50 years. So we have this component of palaeoecology, archaeology, and the vegetation ecology. And the first, I would like to talk about the population dynamics during the prehistory in Czech Republic. You can find the details in this paper, and we wanted to answer these questions. So, is there evidence of regionally specific demographic trajectories in different regions of Czech Republic, or was it just homogeneous? Was it just settled with Neolithic farmers and then they lived there happily until the end of the fairy tale, or not? What kind of social or environmental processes might account for these different demographic trajectories? What was actually just the spatial extent of human settlement in the past? Was the inhabited or once inhabited area, was it abandoned or recolonized? Do we have evidence of these processes during the Holocene in Czech Republic? And can we also trace these demographic changes in the vegetation or not? And then we were also asking about the validity of different archaeological proxies for the population dynamics. So here are this is actually the answer for the last question, for the last research question. Anyway, here on this slide, you can see the archaeological evidence in the from the temporal perspective. So this is based on the radiocarbon dates. We used some probability distribution. There are around 1,500 radiocarbon dates, which are after some more or less simple modeling procedures. They can be translated into these nice curves, which can be then interpreted as demographic fluctuations. So you can see that here is some Mesolithic hunters and gatherers. We usually, in archaeology, we don't trace that many of them because they were mobile and they didn't leave that much archaeological evidence. But they usually have also very low population density. So these factors are influencing this population proxy. Once the Neolithic started, when the societies started farming, once the farmers with Anatolian ancestry arrived to this area, we can see that there is a boom in archaeological evidence based on these radiocarbon dates. So there was probably most likely also the rise of the population in the area of Czech Republic. Then we have some fluctuations, some drops, so we can interpret that as population decreases. There can be several reasons for that, like epidemics, or also transition into different mode of land use management, or different economic modes, so that these people cannot be that easily traced in archaeology. And then you have again from the early Bronze Age, which is in the literature, usually very much related to migration from Eastern Europe, mostly from the steppe region, north from the Black Sea. What you can see from this here, from the, let's say, Middle Bronze Age, is 1,500 BC. It's very, very similar as the Mesolithic, as the hunters and gatherers. However, that doesn't make really sense, and I will illustrate that on this diagram. because this one is based on archaeological sites. So these are just the radiocarbon dates, and these are numbers of archaeological sites dated to different periods and archaeological cultures. And we used some crazy modeling, so that we can have these nicely ordered time blocks. And you can see that again at the beginning of the Neolithic we have some increase of the archaeological sites. Then we have some decrease, which is somehow here, but it's not very good reflecting this one. Then we have increase in the Bronze Age. Okay, we have it here, but then when here we have very few radiocarbon dates, we have this much of archaeological sites, which is signifying very different demographic scenario from this demographic proxy. So we can conclude that this is somehow biased, and the bias is rooted in the archaeological practice, because archaeologists are usually after 1,500 not very interested in taking radiocarbon samples, because they believe that the material culture itself, just looking at it, is actually giving them the feeling of the dating. So it's mostly very unscientific.
Would you please specify what this type of evidence corresponds to these drops?
And here,
this
one or this one?
This decrease, yeah.
So
because the start is Neolithic.
Yeah, the start. Yeah. So this is the start of the Neolithic.
This drop down.
This drop down. Yeah. So there are several explanations for that. In that period, there are some climate fluctuations which are recorded, I think, in one of the Greenland or a couple of the Greenland cores, and this drop is actually visible in many regions of Europe. This is not something very specific Czech or Central Europe. You can see that very much in the Balkans. You can see that in Ireland. There is some reason, and it is suggested that it is a climate because it has impact on so many societies across the whole Europe. This is most likely climate. You can see that it lasted basically until 3000 BC, and then the population after 3000 got somehow recovered. This is related with mostly with migration from Eastern Europe, from the Baltic. Black Sea steppe. We can see that in DNA that there is a lot of people coming from that region. And then this is late Bronze Age, and then Iron Age, mostly here before the year 1. You can see that the last time block with a very high numbers of archaeological sites is the Latine period, which is sometimes interpreted as related to the ancient Celts.
So the drop in the right chart is between 4,000 and 3,000. But if you look at the left chart, then there is actually a peak between 4,000 and 3,000.
Yes.
So is there some like imprecision? Which one is like more precise, the right one?
It depends. It depends. It depends on the time period you want to have a look. So for this period, from the beginning of Neolithic until the Middle Bronze Age, I would take this one, and for the more recent history, I would take this one. However, here, I mean, we are still discussing what these peaks are. What do they actually mean? because of course there is a bias of what was sampled. So for example, here you can see this peak was probably probably caused by very intensive sampling of specific population, which is trichterbecherkultur or funnel beakers, or in Czech, kultura nálevkovitých pohárů. Because this is one of the few archaeological cultures in the local archaeological environment which suddenly have regular burial grounds.
Okay.
And also, I would guess this is the personality of Evžen Neustupný, who was pioneering C14 dating in Czech archaeology since 60s, and he was interested in the same period. So a strong sampling bias caused by the author, investigator, I would guess.
So the right-hand data are more global than the left?
No, they're saying just a bit something different.
So why there is no peak?
Why here is not? Why here?
Data are of the same globality.
Yeah, I mean, you can see. I mean, this data was resampled to 500 years time blocks. So if you have a peak, which is out of this, it can be spread, etc. Also, this peak can come from one archaeological site, but it can give you, for example, 20 C14 samples. I mean, I tried to compensate for that in that model, but still, it can be a couple of sites which have several more C14 samples, but they will be here registered only as one site. There was one.
Yeah, I think we can be debating C14 issues, which there are many of them. But do you think so? Looking at this, we know the C14 is more available somewhere else, and you said there is no global database now. But when we were looking into this and looking at producing some density on bigger scales, right? As you mentioned, this is where we are heading now, synthesis of continents, etc. But we found the issue that, as you mentioned, like 2,000 years, 2,000 years, it stopped at 2,000 years, right? Or 1.5, something like that, and we don't have data. You do have data here. Is there any, movement in the archaeology to somehow compensate for the C14 to build a database of these sites on a higher scale level or something like that?
That would, how to say that? I mean, this is 65,000, approximately 65,000 archaeological components. There are two databases. One of them took, I don't know, 30 or 35 years to create here in Prague. And it is an ongoing process. The other one from the eastern part, from Moravia, I created with another colleague, and it took us 5 years to collect, let's say, 18,000 archaeological components with very few metadata. So Bohemia is much better covered. There's much more information on all these archaeological sites, but it took more than 30 years. And
but just to turn the question around, so is there any incentive that, let's say, even within Europe, that there is some framework or something to actually combine archaeological data from these kind of types together, or to build it higher? Is that we are now seeing it in palaeoecology, right? I mean, other ecological studies where we do synthesis work and we do big databases, is something like this happening in archaeology?
I don't think so. I mean, there are some projects, like big European initiatives, which are somehow collaborate or creating a collaborative environment for different national projects. But the problem in this is different national standards for archaeological sites. Archaeologists from Romania will give you a different definition of that than archaeologists in the UK or Portugal or in Czech Republic. Whereas with C14 dates, set. The only deviation from the scientific standard is the lousiness of people publishing that.
So what is, once more, what is exactly on this graph on the left? You know, there is some tiny heading, but you cannot read it.
It's summed probability distribution.
Summed?
So, yeah.
Summed.
Yeah, the idea is the more artifacts you find, the more people they have.
Yeah.
Right? Which is the issue of you don't have indicates.
Yeah.
And on the second one, so what is the difference between these two?
So these are archaeological sites which have dating and functional association. So then after some quantitative measures, you can have a number of archaeological sites per 500.
On the left-hand side, I mean, you know, on the left-hand side, there are these two pictures, two graphs.
Ah, okay. So the difference.
Yeah.
Yes.
Because there is heading, but the heading is unreadable. It's
okay. So these are all the C14 samples here from Czech Republic, and in this lower level, I divided them into short-lived samples and long-lived samples to explore whether the long-lived samples have a significant effect on the overall curve. But I mean, we don't need to discuss that. That's very much detail. So we can move forward. And if we look at the same data from the spatial point of view, we created these maps because we want to discover the regionally specific population trajectories. And we specified that we want to have 10 regions within this area, which are spatially continuous, and that was the condition, and which are not spatially continuous. So this is kind of relating different squares of the grids with a similar population, similar demographic trajectory. This one is really putting similar things together. So we came up with this 10 regions. We can have a look first at this with the spatially explicit regions. We can have that all the green was very uninhabited, let's say. And then we have two regions in Czech Republic which were more or less continuously inhabited from the Neolithic. And that is central and northwestern Bohemia and southern Moravia. You can see that from the beginning of the Neolithic here, there was just a boom of archaeological evidence, and then it was more or less continuously inhabited without significant breaks in the settlement. In southern Moravia, it's a little bit different, but only a little bit. So we can see this drop around 4,000, 3,000 BC, but otherwise it is very, very similar to this. We can say that these are the lowland regions, the most fertile regions, the most friendly regions for prehistoric farmers. But then we have other, and I would mention here the southern Bohemia, which wasn't very much settled in the Neolithic. There are some archaeological sites, of course, but it wasn't really, the intensity of the settlements of prehistoric farmers wasn't that comparable as in central Bohemia or as in southern Moravia. That is a completely different story. And we can see that this region became more and more settled from the early Bronze Age, after 3000 or after 2500 BC. or even after 2000, that became like a really favorable region to settle. Very similar is also Western Bohemia, around Pilsen. So we can see that there are probably some more Neolithic settlements, but then it became again with the more settled with the Bronze Age. What is also a big difference to continuously settled area is this break, very significant break in after 1000 AD. So during the Roman period, when the Latin period ended, it seems that the settlement just shrinked into only the most favorable areas of Czech Republic. If we have a look on the spatially unconstrained, so we can see that again we have this pink region here with very continuous demographic trajectory. Yes.
Just before you jump in, can you maybe a little bit methodologically explain how was it? I understand it's not some kind of clustering of the data, but yes. Can you explain what was it clustered by, right? What you use as the database?
Based on archaeological data?
Yes, this is the archaeological data. Okay. Yeah, so first we calculated occupancy of each quadrant, which is based, so we kind of clustered all the archaeological sites into the quadrants, and then we calculated the probability of settlement in each time block. We had this, on the previous slide, I have shown these 500 time blocks. So we calculated with Monte Carlo simulations the probability that each square would be settled in each time block.
So it's kind of, again, human density fluctuation in time, and then these are then used to cluster together.
Yes, yes.
Oh, sorry, do you mean presence absence data or
no,
quantity?
It's not present absence.
So you use quantity. You took, I don't know, single find of an X in a field, the same one or
no, it was more
settlement.
So because the archaeological dating has we are not talking about the radiocarbon, but the type of chronological, so based on the material culture. So it has different temporal spans. Sometimes a site is dated to 100 years. Sometimes we can say from the excavation that, yeah, this site is 500 years, was settled during 500 years. This one was 1000 or 700. So we need, and to put this into 500 years time blocks to make it more comparable, and yeah, there are still some problems, but to make it more comparable, we actually modeled the dating of each site 1000 times, and then we took the proportion of the simulations when the dating of the sites fell into that time block.
Okay, this is dating, but what about components? Because we have very different components. Component in archaeology mean the type of finding, to say. How do you deal with? How do you deal with these differences?
Yeah, so we can see here on this diagram that we categorize them. These are the five most common or most frequent categories, like settlements, single finds, burial grounds, forts, production and extraction sites, and all the rest we put into the other. And you mentioned already single finds. So these are finds of individual pots or individual X's on fields without contextual information. So we cannot really say where does it come from. And you can see that actually the dynamic of the single finds is more or less copying the settlements.
Without giving them different weight.
No, we didn't.
Okay.
I don't know, I'm just very interested, but have you, this seems, everything is very competition heavy already, but have you tried the size of your square to change? Because that would have drastic, potentially could have drastic effect on your result, right? If you change your scale.
It would, but we decided to have this this size of square because we also in other papers we used the same squares as the vegetation vegetation is used in Platias, for example. So we took the same so that we have comparable results with the rest of the disciplines. Anyway, back to this. So we have again these continuously settled areas. Obviously, or just by eyeballing, you can say that Bohemia, central Bohemia, northwestern Bohemia was this continuously settled area was also spatially continuous in settlement, whereas Moravia seems to be a more fragmented or more diverse in these regional trajectories. If we have a look again on, for example, the southern Bohemia, we can see that there's this green in the more or less in the center. We can see that there is again just a little bit before the Bronze Age, and then the Bronze Age started, and this is surrounded by the blue area. So the first half is very similar to that one, but then we have the break after 1 AD. So this area was again depopulated, and maybe the people from here came back to the center, or they moved completely somewhere else. And then we have also in southern Bohemia kind of expansion before 1 AD in the Latin period, in the Iron Age, into even more peripheral regions, which were then again abandoned after 1 AD. You can see also that in Moravia there was here in the central, like within the continuously settled area, there was some kind of an inner colonization process. So during the Bronze Age, people inhabited actually a couple of smaller regions in the lowlands, which were not inhabited before. And surrounding this continuously settled area, there are different kind of peripheries, different kind of fluctuations, or let's say buffers to the wilderness.
Can I ask for the previous? In the beginning, you were saying that the light green means there were no settlements, right?
Yeah, more or less.
So you can
very few. You will see.
You can be sure that it's not just a lack of evidence.
No, in archaeology, evidence of absence doesn't mean absence of evidence.
Sorry.
I mean, from archaeology, if we have no archaeological evidence of settlement, it doesn't mean that there wasn't a settlement.
Yeah. So how can you say that there wasn't a settlement?
I mean, that's the model. That's the data we have.
So you cannot say.
Of course not. And
you said it.
I'm not assuming. I'm describing results based on the model and based on the recent data.
All models are wrong, but some of them are used.
Exactly. So there might be quite a big population in Vysočina, but you don't have data.
It would very unlikely.
No. That's you will see later. I think in the same paper they show the same using pollen data, and they show something big different.
Okay. I would say we have to admit that also the archaeological evidence is kind of biased by the activity of archaeologists in the centers of interest, quite often close to the big cities, the university, and heritage companies which are producing basically the data, but also by as Petr mentioned, by the differentiation of activities, of components. And there are certain, I don't want to go into a great detail, but there are certain periods like the last centuries of 4th millennium BC, where we simply have a kind of gap in the evidence. And for example, some recent genetic studies are suggesting that there was a great decrease in population, possibly caused by epidemics or whatever. But we have to bear in mind that we just can't reach the data for that period. It doesn't mean that people didn't use a different way of habitation, which didn't leave the important data for our considerations. So this is something we have to bear in mind. And also you do it in the modeling.
Yeah. So can we follow? Of course, so we have the regions with different population trajectories, and we wanted to know what was the impact of this different demographic development on the vegetation. What was the interaction? So here is some clustering based on the pollen profiles. So we have chosen pollen profiles which come from central Moravia, central and western Bohemia. Sorry. Then we have also southern Bohemia, southern Moravia, and central Moravia here around. And that these regions had pollen profiles in a reasonably good quality with dating, etc., etc. And we created some very, very simple vegetation models on that and compared that with the variance in occupancy in those regions. And yeah, we have also variance in pollen. And here are some, this is the quantification of change in a specific time period, in a specific region. And here we have some characterization of the vegetation. I would speak again about the period between 4000 and 3000 BC, because this we have seen the population decreases, the people somehow disappearing out of the landscape. So we can have a look what was happening in those regions. So we can see that in central Bohemia, central and northwestern Bohemia, which was continuously settled from the beginning of farming, we can see that after, right from or more or less from the beginning of the farming, there is a vegetation change into vegetation, yeah, with some pinus, signifying some disturbances, and then very quickly it switched to more open vegetation with pollen of Cerealia, Plantago, Artemisia, and Phenopodiaceae. And there you can see that once it would change after, let's say, 1,500 years of human management of the landscape, it basically didn't change up to early medieval period. You can see very similar development in southern Moravia. It only came into reality a little bit later. Yeah, we can hypothesize that the fragmentation of the human settlement maybe was the pressure from the human population on the vegetation was probably not so strong. But we can have a look on the southern Bohemia. We have seen that there the population story or the demographic story is a bit different. So in the Neolithic, we don't see that much change, and then it changed really after the start of the early Bronze Age, when we see in archaeology the population boom. However, there's a difference. So we see that these prehistoric farmers didn't change this landscape, this vegetation, into what was known in northwestern Bohemia or central Bohemia or southern Moravia. It was a little bit different. And very similar it was also in central Moravia, which have much stronger Neolithic populations. So it started before the early Bronze Age, but the vegetation was more or less similar, and it became different only with the Iron Age. So this period, we can see that there was some abandonment on different regions in Czech Republic, and we can see also large variance in pollen on the level of Czech Republic in these regions, and that means that the vegetation in that period, in these 2,000 years, was very diverse due to the abandonment processes of the Neolithic people, but also that some of them probably became more mobile and their agriculture became more extensive. So they took probably larger portions of land.
This was published somewhere, the previous.
Yes, yeah, this is everything in the paper I've shown at the beginning. And this is this goes back to the question whether we have no evidence of human settlement also in for example, in the Bohemian Moravian Highlands or in the Šumava. We have, of course we have. But when you compare it, when you want to create something more comprehensive, then you lose some minor details. But then at the end of this exercise, we came with categorizing of the Czech Republic into these 5 types of, let's say, landscapes based on the demographic trajectories. So we have a continuous settlement, which has more than 75 time blocks occupied. And these are the orange areas. So we can see again the spatially continuous area and more fragmented area. Then we define the next category as a stable periphery, which has between 25 and 75% of time blocks occupied, and maximum 4 colonization or abandonment events. So this is the blue one. Then we have more pulsing periphery. So these pulsing peripheries can have still 25 to 75% of occupied time blocks, but they can have much more colonization and abandonment events. So people were coming and going or periodically staying or whatever. And then we have minimum settlement activity, which has less than 25% of the time blocks occupied. These are these yellow. So here you can see the mountain areas, but also lowland area in the Moravian Gate. And then we have so far 0 evidence of settlement. But again, I'm not saying that there is no settlement. This is 0 evidence.
Do you have any idea why Moravia should be more fragmented than Central Bohemia? Because if you go there, you do not see kind of more like heterogeneity or anything like this.
Yes, there could be one reason, and that's the archaeological data. So the archaeological data from here, that's the work of, I don't know, dozens of people from the last 35 years. Okay. And this is work of 2 people from 5 years. No, it's not real.
Eastern Bohemia, because people from Eastern Bohemia, they don't fulfill the.
Yes, that could be. That could be one of the reasons, but of course there could be environmental reasons. So, for example, when I was showing these, I think it was in this area with the early Bronze Age colonization, like inner colonization. So we can see that there are also different soils. And there are some hypotheses that certain kind of soils were not favorable by the Neolithic farmers. And also areas which were too warm were not favorable by the LBK farmers at the beginning of the Neolithic. And once the Bronze Age populations introduced new technologies, but also they can have also different crops, more adapted crops. They could finally get into those regions. The other reason can be also population pressure, because we see in the early Bronze Age that there is a lot of archaeological sites, so there maybe wasn't any way place to live. So they moved to the southern Bohemia and all the other.
Yes, but this argument about the soils could be applied to this central Bohemia too, right? Because the southern part of this continuous area definitely has worse soils than the northern one. So
yes,
there must be something else, right?
Yeah, I have already seen some soil maps of this area, and the soils here in north from Elbe are also different from here.
Yeah.
So that can be one of the reasons. Anyway, to also to illustrate how the social archaeology is very much important for these kind of interpretations is you remember though the southern Bohemia. I mentioned that it got settled in early Bronze Age. And this is a period, and yeah, you can just ask, why early Bronze Age? What was happening at that time? And what we know from metallurgy, from archaeometallurgical studies, is that if you compare the composition of those artifacts on a Central European or even European scale, you can see that at that time, probably the networks of copper trades, so also the copper sources, changed from the Carpathian Basin or from Slovakia towards eastern Alps. So this was a very logical and strategic place to settle, because this was the direct connection to Eastern Alps. And yeah, of course, people didn't just abandon Moravia in the early Bronze Age and didn't move to southern Bohemia, but the emergence of these networks, which were using the copper from Eastern Alps, just enabled the settlement here.
Yes, but in the early Bronze Age, so many things happened
Yes.
that the causality can be, very different. Change in the agricultural techniques, in the crop.
Yes, it's very, it's very. There are a lot of things happening at that time. Okay, so this was the longest part, and I have two more papers, which will be shorter. So we in our research we also focused on the pollen anthropogenic indicators, because they are somehow used intuitively, and sometimes we don't know whether they really have some relation to the human settlement. So are they actually like really reacting to the human settlements or not? And you can see also on this map what is part of the problem. So most of the pollen profiles in Czech Republic are in mountain regions, and there's not that much archaeology around. So it's hard to choose. Even if you want to collaborate with archaeologists, it's hard for them or for us to choose what kind of archaeological data should I get. There are also profiles in Central Moravia, also in the lowland area, so there are some. So we have chosen those. The question also related to these buffers is, and I was asking that many times when I collaborated with paleoecologists. So what do you think is the source area around your pollen profile for the pollen which is there? Which translated into archaeology, what was the what do you think the distance of people lived around here and they had impact on the vegetation coming into your pollen profile? So we looked into that, and we compared some good archaeological or good pollen profiles with good dating and enough samples, etc., etc. And we also took the archaeological data around it in different buffers. Because you can, if you have a look on paleoecological papers, which are discussing the topics, usually the buffers for archaeology are something between 5 and 50 kilometers. And sometimes it's 200, and we don't really know, why 200, why 5? So it is quite a mystery. So we decided to take to analyze buffers between 5 and 50. Here we have some primary and secondary anthropogenic indicators, which should be plants which are indicating directly or indirectly human activity. A typical anthropogenic indicator would be for example, wheat, which is cultivated plant and it doesn't very much grow without humans. And indirect anthropogenic indicator would be, for example, plantago, which is native, but very much likes trampling and very much likes meadows and pastures, etc., etc., and open landscapes. So this is the concept behind it. And here are also some trees, because we wanted to analyze what is the significance of trees and their dynamics. Can they actually signify the human impact directly or not? So we have seen that if we took only the numbers of sites, of pollen sites, where the percentages in pollen profiles of these taxa correlate with the settlement dynamics, we can see that, for example, for cerealia, this correlates only at 20 kilometers and nowhere else. If you take shorter buffer or smaller buffer, it doesn't. If you take longer, it doesn't. Much better, if you take just the percentages, much better is plantago. This very much correlates with the human activity, with the archaeological evidence in almost all the buffers, except the shorter one, except the shortest one, the 5 kilometers. And this is very similar to other human indicators. If you take the percentages, you can see that there are some nice correlations of these percentages, also with Albius, Carpinus, Fagus. So these trees are actually also correlating, or their dynamics is correlating with the human activity from archaeology, and in longer distances even more. But this is not the archaeology and data from pollen profiles. But of course, the human human activities, but also the vegetation, there are more factors influencing that. So there's climate, but there is also the temporal trend. So vegetation in one time block is actually influenced by the vegetation from the previous block. So all these can be taken into account. So we created different scenarios, also taking these factors into account. We didn't include a climate model for that period, but we took at least elevation of that specific site, which is somehow reflecting the environment. And then you can see that in these scenarios, some of the anthropogenic indicators again correlate also when you include those other factors. And the best obviously is Artemisia, correlates very good with archaeological sites on all the distances. So it seems to be very, very favorable. When we included all the other factors, Cerealia gets much better results. And Plantago again. The story with trees here is a bit different than here. So under these conditions of these models, these species correlate less or even do not correlate at all. And this is because the other factors spatially correlate with archaeology. So archaeology correlates with the elevation. There are much more sites in the lowlands than in the mountains. So once the archaeology correlates with the elevation, then it turns around the correlation with the trees and signifying the human activity. And to sum up this paper, I would say that not all anthropogenic indicators are actually related to the actual archaeological data. There are different taxa or groups who are relating to humans on different spatial scales. And you can see that on the diagram. So for example, if you are interested in herbs, the most taxa which are correlating with your pollen profiles are at the distance of 15 or 20 kilometers. If you are interested in woodland, how the woodland reacted to humans, you can even work with larger buffers from archaeology, 30, 40 kilometers. At that distance, you will get the best results, I would say. So you need also to regionalize these anthropogenic indicators because they behave different on different elevations. And these buffer zones are actually in a stark contrast with previous and empirical research, because there are people who did research into that. They did some studies on the mapping of the recent vegetation around their pollen traps, and their conclusions were that for that the trees surrounding the pollen traps and which are reflected then are coming from the distance of 4 kilometers only. And for the herbs, only a couple of hundreds of meters. So this is very different from our results. And this paper will be published this year in Press Lyon. And the last, because we had also vegetation ecologists in our project, so we wanted to relate the recent vegetation with the past settlement. Why? Because we know that the farming populations, when they arrived and when they introduced the new land use and when they brought the crops, they also brought the so-called archaeophytes. And these are taxa, which are kind of ancient invaders. There are weeds. Sometimes they're called weeds, and they're still in our current landscapes, and you can see them, but they come from these ancient farmers. So we were asking if the large-scale patterns of the current plant diversity are somehow reflecting the past settlement. And thus also the present day species distribution range reflects also the time when these archaeophytes actually arrived to this settlement or not. And the results are here. So this is these are not very results, but these are the datasets we included. So here are the archaeophytes proportions coming from the Cladius database. I think at the end, from the Cladius, we analyzed around millions of records. I think 6 millions records coming from vegetation surveys. We had our archaeology model based on this is the occupancy. I explained that before. We have some elevation and forest cover, which was a proxy for the current land use. And these are the results. So around 60% of the whole variability was explained by these three factors. And you can see that archaeology, the presence of archaeology, the occupation still accounts for 1%, 1.1% of the variability of that. We can see that the number of archaeophytes is related to the overall diversity in all those quadrants, and that can be caused by several factors. The archaeophytes are quite popular and they are endangered, usually protected, and people like them, people like to record them. So that's why we have them there. And we see no negative effect of the introduced species in the prehistory. Because sometimes when you are studying the current invasive species, they usually have very negative effect on the local ecosystems, but the prehistoric ones were very nice to the local community, and they increased the regional biodiversity. We also studied the minimum residence time. So we know about the species, about the taxa. We studied how long they are in the current in Czech Republic, and this knowledge comes from archaeobotany. So from the macro remains coming from archaeological contacts, we know that all these species were from here, here, and here, and we can see that there is a positive relationship between the time they were introduced and the spatial extent, but it is non-significant. So yeah, we were hoping for a better result, but not yet. So yeah, we have the indirect relationship between the current spatial spread of these ancient invaders and the extent of the prehistoric agricultural settlement. And why we are getting to the end? Why do we need all this? Why do we need collaboration between archaeology, between kind of a social science or humanities, it depends how you look at it, and palaeoecology, but also a vegetation ecology. And this, I think, can be very nicely summarized with this diagram, where you can see that by studying the past, studying what people did in the past, and also studying the legacy of the past, which is visible in the current landscape, we can actually get inspired, or we can learn what to do in future, because we are facing some significant problems in our ecosystems. And the past can be kind of a source of ideas and source of knowledge we can use. So to conclude my talk, I would like to stress that if we want to speak about the role of humans in the past ecosystems, we need to work with data humans. We don't need to eyeball or read some outdated archaeology books, but we need the data, and the data is in many cases already existing. Archaeology is nowadays ready to provide these quantified data, but we also need the qualitative knowledge. We need, for example, the knowledge on the shift in trade networks, which can be very much stimulating the past settlement. And I would also stress that only truly interdisciplinary approaches can push the research on this human vegetation interactions forward and inform our current policymakers about the necessary changes needed to be done for our existence on this planet. Thanks.
Maybe I would get back to your last chapter or result concerning the archaeophytes. So you said that basically that's it. It's 1%, so it's not too much, right? This effect of archaeological settlements. Is it even like you have an evidence that it is a significant effect? Okay.
It's not a lot, but it's significant.
Okay, because before you showed it, I was just exactly thinking that there must be a strong effect of environment because our archaeophytes live in lowlands and so on. So that's kind of And okay, but it's
In which sense is it significant? Because there are strong autocorrelations between these factors. Mm-hmm. So how do you deal with this problem that you can never rid of, in fact? Totally.
Oh, no, but you put it into some multiple regression or something, right? And then the effect is.
So multiple regression.
The environment is almost similar. I mean, ecology together with environment.
Yeah.
So it was one would expect. We didn't test climate effect.
No, we didn't. No. This is I think the environment is here represented by elevation only.
That's the problem. Almost anything you can explain by elevation in this country, especially. It's kind of regional, the strongest regional bias, obviously.
Yeah. But still, archaeology has a significant effect on them.
I think it's great what you're doing because you're overcoming the neo-Kantian bias of the Kulturwissenschaft versus Naturwissenschaft. And we have that on the large scale of the history that David Christian started with integrating genetics, philology, and archaeology. And now you're adding to the mixture botany or study of Anthropocene. Now, the interesting thing for me is, and I'm more, more theoretical, philosophical, is the past, there was a series of events, and then they sent information signals to the present. And our challenge is to distinguish information from noise, the signal from the noise. And what was interesting for me in your paper is how you shifted from the data to the information theory. Because you get data, and you say, you have the carbon 14, you say, well, this doesn't work, this is noise, this is not signal. And then you accumulate deductively, actually, because you have the inductive information from the archaeology, and then you deductively say, well, actually, there are these types of lands that they can cultivate, and that we know from the present. That's something that you can do experiments on right now. You can plant things in the land now and see what happens. And then you deduce from that what the data that you have from the past is, and then you shift some. You can and what I found more interesting is that these are my information theories. These are accumulated, and then based on those information theories, I go to the data and I see what it means. The expression that philosopher Arthur Danto was talking about, historians in the conventional sense, he said, nobody walks naked into the archive. That is, we all come with all our equipment and with all our information theories. So what you're actually doing is that you're just extending the range of information theories, and that allows you then to use all this data that, as you say, was there all the time. Would you agree with that kind of analysis?
Yeah, probably. I never thought about it like that. Yeah, probably yes. And of course, I didn't have time to discuss also all the biases and about what I was.
I'll explain to you what's controversial about what I just said for people who are not here, for philosophers who may not be here. Because the question is, what is history about? Because what the ordinary person would say, history is about what happened in the past. And it's in archaeology as well, it's an empirical science. The problem is that you can't really observe Napoleon. And you can't observe the Neolithic people. What you observe is what's in the present. And then the shift is that it's actually not about the past, it's about the evidence that's about in the present. That all the questions were about, what does it mean? Is the absence of evidence is evidence of absence? No, it's not, because signals were lost along the way. And then the next stage from that is actually what historians, archaeologists, geneticists, philologists, and so on, what they are actually doing, what they actually are, is information theory. What they're doing is sifting noise from information. It's really not about the past at all. It's about the information in the present.
Yeah, and I think this is part of the modeling. So we are, if you want to stay on the level of empirical evidence, you cannot handle 65,000 archaeological sites or even more, and that's why you probably have to move with the help of modeling towards the information theory and think about it differently.
Yeah, again, super interesting. This is very in line with what we have been doing. But of course, there is this interesting triangle of climate, humans, vegetation. And there are two different ways of looking at this. There is, the people from palaeoecology will say how humans have been affecting the vegetation, and that's why they look in the pollen diagrams, and then you see, there's pre-decline, that means people are down. Then there is the other group, which is, from places like the people 3000 group from Pages, who say we're looking into how the vegetation affects humans, right? Because they're saying, now there was not enough vegetation to feed the people, and that's why we see the decline. And so this is very difficult because these are possibly, I don't know, but possibly these are all interconnected, right? I guess climate, of course, influences vegetation, the vegetation potentially influences humans, but also the humans were influencing vegetation. In this paper or in the future, how do you want to tackle this? That there is this issue that all these things are, it's not one directional with one thing and one, but it's both, right? Because they're influencing each other. And this is very difficult to, I would say, extract from these empirical data, as you mentioned, right? Because it's always one is dependent, one is independent, right? If you do anyone. But we don't know which is which in most of these cases.
Yes, that is true. And I think this is what we are aiming in the project I'm working on now at UCL. So I'm a part of the team which the acronym is COREX, and it's called From Correlations to Explanations. And what we do there is, we are doing quite similar things as I did here, but of course, there are much more people, and for example, our spatial extent is we are in temperate Europe, from France up to Urals, and we are collecting the C14 dates. We are collecting isotopic data from humans, from archaeobotanical macro remains. We are collecting also like spectra of crops coming from macro remains, archaeological data, including metric data, isotopic, DNA, like the main and the most novel data coming from archaeological science. And we are striving to tackle this problem that correlation is not a causation, and how to, we are trying to find a way how to put this into more interactive how to say, analysis, and we will have also vegetation models from that, ancient DNA. So we would be able, I would say, to identify in a much better way the causes and effects. But I would say that I think I'm a strong proponent of regional development. I would say that people in different regions, they still kept the creativity quite a lot, and they tackle different problems or same problems in a different way. We will probably create some models how people dealt with some climate deteriorations. But there will be different scenarios in, I don't know, Eastern Balkan and Northwestern France, because they had different technologies, different cultural traditions, different networks, and different levels of resilience and all this stuff.
I've been wondering, I missed something. How would you separate, what was the contrast between archaeological and plant use? Those data, how did you define this difference?
Yeah, so the land use that is based on the forest cover, on the current forest cover. So it was the forested and deforested. And the archaeological occupancy that is based on the
land use doesn't mean arable or pasture, no. It means forest cover.
Yes, it means forest cover because I would say most of the archaeophytes favor open landscape.
So archaeological evidences for grazing is included in ecology, in effect of ecology.
Kind of. Yeah, kind of.
Yeah. Because this is current. Forest cover is current.
Yeah, this is current forest cover.
I'm sorry, the occupancy. You take prehistory as a whole in this, or you have some because the younger periods affect obviously the presence more than the older periods. For instance, one problem. Then you have since high medieval period, everything has changed in this picture. So how do you use that?
And no, because you can compare. I mean, the relationship of the minimum resident time is positive, but it's not significant. Mm-hmm. So you can see that those plants introduced in early medieval periods, so around 1000 AD, have on average lower spatial extent than the Neolithic ones. Yeah. Although the spatial extent of that settlement was much larger than the Neolithic ones. Yeah.
Okay, so this compensates for the effect. In fact, yeah. Okay.
That might be. Thanks.
I would like to ask about the archaeophytes. what was the mechanism like? Were people like intentionally spreading Plantago or Silene, or was it like that they created the conditions under which the plants like spread it naturally?
Mm-hmm. It's a good question. I'm not sure if I'm qualified to answer that, but I will say what how I understand it. So I think that in the I mean, here you have the Adonis, which is, please correct me, you have some great ecologists here. So which is a weed originating in Mediterranean, right? So this was really brought with the crops, with the cereals, and it was just bred with on the fields with the cereals. This was not intentional. And then it's of course it needs specific ways of agriculture, specific ways of disturbance regime, etc., etc. So nowadays, of course, it is not very much on the fields, but the others can have probably similar stories. You mentioned Plantago. That is not archaeophyte, so that was that is part of the native vegetation. But Plantago is, I mean, it likes open landscapes. It very often grows on pastures and meadows or parts which are trampled by people or animals. So usually it's very typical anthropogenic indicator, secondary anthropogenic indicator in pollen.
Yeah, thank you.